Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. This is a stream I actually plan to make because obviously we are always looking forward to our favorite Apple Jesus, Mark Gurman, and his, at this point, pretty reliable predictions. This year, I really cannot complain about too much. Of course, famously, the M4 iPad Pro was just a week before its announcement, the M3 iPad Pro, so that came a little bit last minute. But for everything else, I mean, he got the overall schedule right. I mean, some stuff was delayed, or was it? But it seems like for the October event, everything should be quite as we expect. We, of course, already know about the existence of the M4 chip. We know that some Macs are now hitting low supplies, which is always indicative of a refresh, or often indicative of a refresh. So I'm really, really looking forward to discussing all of that with you guys, looking into all the rumors that we have already talked about, maybe freshening up your minds a little bit, hearing what you guys think, hearing what you guys are looking forward to maybe buying yourselves. So that will be quite interesting. Before I start, shout out to Max Maximus, leaving a very generous €6 donation, saying that he still has to finish some work stuff, but he will hopefully join midstream. Hope so too, brother. Wishing us fun and says he is looking forward to some juicy M4 discussions. Thank you so much, as do I. Riveting Tail Chap also joining the chat, saying that he probably will have to work. What's up with you guys working on Sunday? Like, no, I believe me, I understand. I work at the hospital. Like, I know what it means to work on Sunday. But like, I never expected like, oh, two chats, like both people having to work on Sunday. But he still really wanted to leave a comment and to like. That's very much appreciated. All helps tremendously with the algorithm. Angelica saying she looks very forward to us all also coming together on Sunday. I also look very much forward to that as well. And Tipo Master saying Mark and Marky Mark. So let's see who is Marky Mark here. From the K writing, I highly assume you mean Mark Gurman. And Dream SMP, long time no see, brother, saying you're here. Welcome to the stream, brother. Great start to the stream. As always, I want to give you guys the YouTube jazz order to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Like the video if you are enjoying it. My rambling. I'm sorry, I just came from the gym. I'm a little dehydrated. Comment. I love me a lively live chat. Love interacting with you guys. Love hearing your opinions. Of course, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. And if you want to support this channel and me directly, you can do like Max Maximus did and leave a super chat or a super sticker. You can become a channel member. Shout out again to Max Maximus and Angelica, who are Mark Tech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube, or you can become a supporter over on Patreon. Links to all of that are in the description of this channel. And of course, if you want to join a hellhole, please follow me on Twitter. I try to make it entertaining. I still will tweet about politics, but I usually am one of the more sensible guys when it comes to that stuff. So let's get started. And today I actually, I haven't prepared like multiple topics because obviously our main topic of the day is the Power On newsletter by Mark Gurman and all the predictions he's making in there. This is a very wordy newsletter. I think today is the very first time I actually really try to read everything he writes. And as somebody who does 1.5, 2 hours, sometimes beyond 3 hour streams, I can appreciate being very wordy, but it very much seems like he has a minimum word count to meet, because some of it stuff here is really not that necessary. Dream SMP saying, just traded in my Samsung Tab S8 for the Tab S Ultra, and you had to pay 900 quid for it. Yeah, so then the resale value, I guess, for the S8 wasn't too great. It rhymed. I'm such a brilliant artist. 8 rhymes with great. Jesus Christ, I'm really too dehydrated. Let me get a sip of water, guys, before I start making even more stupid dad jokes. So, For years, Apple Inc. has updated its biggest products on an annual basis. Well, that's true for the iPhone, the Apple Watch, kind of nothing else though. Like we've had Macs and iPads more on like an 18-month cycle. The iPad mini that we're talking about will be soon 3 years old. So, yeah. The company gives a preview of its new software, WWDC, of course, and then devices actually launch closer to the holiday season in September and October. Makes sense. Again, this is the kind of stuff you have to write as an analyst. He does describe this all in more detail, the strategy behind it. I don't think that's very interesting for us because I think most of us are actually pretty familiar with how Apple's like strategic software and hardware rollouts work. But I guess this is not just for tech enthusiasts. This is also for financial investors, of course. I mean, this is Bloomberg after all, and this is also for maybe people who are just getting into Apple stuff, and obviously they might have heard that Mark Gurman is a reputable source. So yeah, it makes sense. He describes a little bit of Apple's organization here by hardware, software, and services, rather than having individual divisions for each product category. That makes sense because one piece of code for an operating system might become useful in the cloud as well. One piece of hardware for an iPad might become useful down the road in an iPhone. It just wouldn't make sense to separate any of that. Of course, we all know and we have discussed yesterday just how many operating systems Apple already has between iOS, iPadOS, macOS, visionOS, watchOS, tvOS, and to a lesser degree, I guess you could call it HomeOS and I don't know, Pod OS or Listen OS or something like that for AirPods. So there's, of course, all the accessories, even to a degree like AirTags, which, of course, run a very, very, very simple code basis in comparison to our phones and tablets. So, again, this is all, of course, Mark Gurman also commenting a little bit on the state of Apple software. We've already talked about that yesterday, for example, with the original iPadOS 18 release breaking M4 devices, and then, of course, subsequent beta releases for watchOS and HomePods, resulting in similar problems for those devices. I've already commented that to me, beta issues don't really count that much. I've plenty criticized Apple for breaking a precious device like the M4 iPad Pro, but I've also, of course, put it into context that yes, there's a metric F-ton of operating systems for Apple to support with a lot more hardware now as Apple supports devices 7-8 years old. Sometimes when we talk about operating system like tvOS, maybe even close like to a decade old. Tippermaster saying, fully agree, sometimes he has to hit a word count and do a weekly column and it seems like he's stretching. Yeah, it's also like his stuff, it combines a lot of what he writes previously, right? So, for example, here he reminds us that we are getting an Apple Watch Ultra 3 and a new SE next year. That's, of course, in the context of us getting quote unquote just the Apple Watch Series 10 this year in the last event. So again, we have talked about this ad nauseum in some ways, but we've also talked about all of this. However, there is now more details coming, and I really like details. I always like to shake the tree that is Mark Gurman, hope that some details fall out and we can enjoy those juicy fruits, those fruits of our labor, where we definitely didn't labor too much for those, but it's definitely still a piece of enjoyment for all of us. And the detail that is coming out here is actually pretty simple, right? Apple eyes November 1st as date for its next product release, with more devices following in early 2025. Now that the iPhone 16 is shipping, Apple is turning its attention to other hardware products. They're describing it as like the Eye of Sauron. It's like it has like a new thing to focus on. It's like, yeah, of course, Apple has an annual cycle, including a new low-end iPhone, updated iPads. We actually have talked about that yesterday a little bit. I think that now I'm pretty much convinced that iPhone SE 4 and iPad Air next gen, it might be M4 based, might just be still M2, will be the first devices to feature Apple's new modems. And so that will be very interesting. And of course, the M4 Max. That, of course, is where a lot of my audience is looking forward to, because I know you guys really like chip discussions. I mean, Max Maximus said he's looking forward to some juicy M4 talks. So I will definitely be happy to provide you that once it's actually there. I'm not buying M4 hardware right now because I'm not very much in need of M4 hardware. But hey, if any of you wants to send me a review unit or convince Apple or some store you work for to send me something, I'm more than game to review it. First, I expect Apple to announce the following products around the end of October. So when he says November 1st, he means that this is when devices actually go on sale. That makes sense. You don't want it too far away from the actual holiday quarter. You want a few weeks for people to actually become familiar with your new lineup. You want some ads to actually hit people's eyeballs. So that makes perfect sense. Making an end of October presentation also makes sense. I mean, last year we literally had one at Halloween, which was the Scary Fast Apple event where we got M3 hardware, and the company is currently aiming to then release it to at least some of them on Friday, November 1st. We've heard that maybe M4 Pro, M4 Max based devices might take a little longer to release than base M4 devices, so that will be interesting, but I doubt that any gap here will be significantly larger than a week, maybe two. So maybe some stuff launches November 1st, some stuff launches like November 8th, some stuff launches like November 15th. And by the holidays, I know it counts kind of all as the holidays, but let's say by Christmas, it all has good supply, so they are more than capable of meeting demand, and Apple has a decent amount of new money coming in for their last quarter of the year. So nothing crazy here. We have seen that exact schedule play out multiple times over the years. Apple has been a little more aggressive now with Apple Silicon Max to actually target almost annual releases. Sometimes it becomes a little more, sometimes it actually becomes a little less, like in the case of M2 Pro and M2 Max MacBook Pros, which were released in the beginning of 2023. They were then updated actually at Apple's October 2023 event. So sometimes Apple will actually hurry up the release schedule a little bit if something before that might have been delayed by a little bit. So it all makes sense. So what are we actually looking forward to here? First is a low-end 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M4 chip. This is what we've discussed actually in most detail right now. Recently, at least, I think the Mac Mini is the only one that competes here. And that is because we, of course, have known that the M4 chip has more display controllers, more Thunderbolt controllers. I'm not quite a die expert here what exactly was improved, and then we've had the leaked packaging for that low-end 14-inch MacBook Pro that suggested potentially a 16 gigabyte base configuration with 512 gigabytes of storage, so that would be double the RAM. We don't know if the base pricing will adjust from $15.99 to potentially $16.99 maybe to accommodate that improvement. But we also know that it will come with 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports rather than 2, which has been more standard, of course, on the MacBook Air and the low-end 14-inch MacBook Pro. It's the M Pro and M Max devices that get more ports because, of course, they are based on chips with more dies, more PCIe lanes, more display controllers, more Thunderbolt controllers. So this would be a great value addition here. It would also solve, of course, some of the problems down the road with, like, currently, if you want to support 2 displays, you have to, of course, close your MacBook so the inner display doesn't work. This, I think, would give you finally basically basically 3 display support, with 1 display being your MacBook Pro and then 2 displays being connected to some of your 3 Thunderbolt ports and your HDMI ports. So a mix of those, which of course would be very, very welcome, because in my opinion, it has always been weird to have 2 Thunderbolt ports, 1 HDMI port, but then you only can connect 1 display. I personally never connect to more than 1 display at a time, but I still fully understand why consumers were like, really? Why is that limitation here? And that limitation was here because in its base thought, the very base M series chips are basically AX processors that were previously designed for iPads and slightly now tuned for Macs. At least that's how I perceive them. It's only the Pro and Max chips that I really see as like desktop class. And in my opinion, it just makes sense to, now that M chips are very much known for Apple Silicon Macs, to give them a few more features that make them a little bit more Mac-y, a little bit more desktop-y, if that makes sense to you. Then there's a high-end 16 and 14-inch MacBook Pros with M4 chips. With M4 chips, we of course mean here M4 generation chips, specifically M4 Pro and M4 Max. We don't know any specific changes. It's very likely that, for example, one change across the entire portfolio would be faster memory, which we know, of course, Apple utilizes 7500 megatransfers per second memory, LPDDR5X inside the M4 iPad Pro. We know they utilize that inside the A18 and A18 Pro chips inside the iPhone 16 series. So that would be one thing. Whether or not Apple changes anything on the more Pro devices, maybe by giving them finally Thunderbolt 5 or PCIe 5 storage, or even more memory in the base configuration beyond like 18 gigabytes. Maybe now that maybe with the base 14-inch MacBook Pro moving from 8 to 16, there would be some room, of course, to maybe bump up the M4 Pro MacBook Pro from 18 gigabytes to 24. Again, all of that is highly speculative, and Mark Gurman does not give us those details because, of course, he does not want to get any of that stuff too wrong, but that would be, of course, very, very interesting to me. There will be a revamped Mac Mini in M4 and M4 Pro chip configurations. That makes perfect sense. The current Mac Mini comes in M2 and M2 Pro configurations. We, of course, know that the Mac Mini is rumored to get a new design. I probably should have, by the way, put on my thumbnail like the actual redesigned Mac Mini and not the old one. I just thought of that. That would be very interesting. We know that it will likely get front ports similar to the Mac Studio. Most likely those ports will then just turn into simple USB-C ports, basically around 10 gigabits on the base M4, and then on the M4 Pro variant they will become full Thunderbolt ports, then 3 ports on the back. Plenty of ports definitely here. Tippomaster saying, it was interesting to find that A18 is not a binned version of the A18 Pro. Right, we've talked about that in the last video, or the video before that. I'm getting confused. It's a different chip. I wonder if we'll find more like in the M4 chips, not just Pro Max being different, but even the M4s. I actually had that thought today during the workout. I don't think it makes sense for me to go into too much detail, but maybe before the actual event, I could write down, similar to my old predictions on how Apple would bin the 18 Pro. And now knowing that Apple doesn't do only binning, but also literally like separate die designs, maybe I could do that for the base M4 chip down the road. Saruji did mention once that Apple Silicon started as a copy-paste versions. Right, it was basically just larger chips, and don't forget that literally the A12X chip was at some point the development basis for Apple Silicon before we got M1. So Apple definitely understands that there is value to just take IP, intellectual property, from like the basic core designs from the iPhone, even like the Apple Watch, using efficiency course and stuff like that, learning from all of that, copying some stuff one to one to just bigger dice, but also create more specific Mac focused functionality, more controllers, more lanes, some stuff to accelerate x86 and virtual machines, to make compatibility with older code better. Yeah, it all makes sense. Like if you really look at how Apple Silicon has been developing, to me it's actually a very, very smart rollout. But the future was more bespoke silicon for every application. Yeah, it of course, like some people have speculated that the best way to do so would be chiplets, similar to what AMD does. But Apple is so efficiency focused, I honestly don't know if they even like chiplets. Like, I understand they use them for like the ultra chips, where they combine two max processors. But for one, that's their most expensive solution. So they're using very expensive interconnects there. They're using it only for desktop class devices. So efficiency is the least of their worries there. I don't know if they ever will go like chiplet design instead of maybe even creating full on separate dies, binning down bigger dies. They have so much versatility now. They have like two A series chips now. Again, previously they had A and AX. Now they have A and A Pro. They have three main M series chips with a fourth one that is basically two combined of the highest end ones, and then they have subversions of each chip which are binned ones. Like M4, of course, we know comes with 6+3 cores and 6+4 cores. We know the Pro chips have binning across both the CPU and GPU cores. So there is so much versatility here for Apple to utilize, for pricing, for, of course, profit margins for them, for saving some energy in some devices that might not be able to fully utilize the power of a full die. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you for reminding us, Tipo Master. Refreshed iMac with an M4 chip. This is where my criticism comes in. I think we are very much overdue an iMac with an M4 Pro or even Max chip. I mean, it's not crazy to think that, given that we had an iMac Pro in the past with like pretty beefy graphics as well. There definitely would be room for a Pro chip, probably even a Max chip, not in the chassis of the current iMac that we have, but it wouldn't take too much more to actually fit those chips inside. Apple could even use like just two pretty large fans there, so the volume of the actual fans wouldn't be too loud, which of course would be more of a problem for a portable device. Yeah, like I'm a little still confused with what exactly Apple is targeting with the iMac, given that the Mac Mini comes with the M4 Pro. Like, if people were to tell me, oh, Apple sees the iMac very similar to the Mac Mini, I'm like, okay, that's cool. Then why is the Mac Mini getting an M4 Pro chip despite supposedly getting shrunk down in size? At the same time, the iMac is still keeping only to the base versions. It's a little weird. Next is a refreshed iPad mini. This is actually a change from previous stuff, where usually we talked about a refreshed iPad mini together with a refreshed base iPad. So currently that's like the 10th gen iPad at $350, featuring the A14 chip. We speculated maybe Apple could give it like an A16, give it a small performance boost relatively without extra power consumption, 2 gigs extra memory and stuff like that. Seems like that's not happening. Maybe Apple still just wants to sell out of all the 10th gen iPads they have. But we are getting a refreshed iPad mini. Of course, the iPad mini right now featuring an A15 chip. So that one is getting likely updated to maybe the base A18 chip. I would argue, maybe so that the entire new iPad lineup would feature Apple Intelligence at $500 and above, and below that there would just be the base iPad where Apple could say, look, it's more focused on kids, it's more focused on education, you're supposed to kind of browse with it, play basic games, so it might not need all that functionality at least right away, and then in 2 years or so Apple gives it like a big Apple Intelligence focused refresh. Yeah, that's kind of where I speculate it would go. But of course, Mark Gurman is not finished here with the October event. He goes on to predict more products that are coming out in early 2025, which is, of course, very, very fascinating. It's unfortunate that we do not see here Mac Studio and Mac Pro. So it seems like these are still very much scheduled for the second half of 2025. However, I would hope that maybe they become like WWDC announcements and come out in like July, and that we don't have to wait until like next October to get these products. Yeah, but he is a little careful with what he predicts for the second half of 2025. He's a lot more certain about what's coming in the first half. So that's what I wanted to cover here. I expect Apple to kick off 2025 with several other new devices in the first half of the year. 13 and 15-inch MacBook Air models with M4 makes perfect sense. M4 we know is plenty efficient to be in a fanless design. Of course, we know it's in like the 5.1 millimeter thick iPad Pro. These devices, of course, offer better cooling than that. They have larger batteries than that. And of course, they're a good way for Apple to target people with lower incomes. It would be interesting to see, of course, what the exact configuration of the MacBook Air will look like once Apple upgrades the MacBook Pro to 16 gigabyte of base memory. Maybe Apple would go something crazy like 12 gigabytes. I mean, it's crazy once you have 16 gigabytes in the lineup. It's not crazy by in of itself. Or maybe they just push pricing down to of like just around $9.99 instead of $10.99, but keep to 8 gigabytes. It's hard to predict. Hopefully Mark Gurman will have more details on that as well. And of course, if Apple changes any of the pricing in the lineup with this event, because if the base memory changes on the MacBook Pro and it becomes a disproportionately just way too good of a deal versus the MacBook Air, maybe we'll see some small price or configuration adjustments even this year. But yeah, I would definitely expect then some changes happening next year. And then there's the revamped iPhone SE that is known as V59. This is actually the same code name for it that we have gotten from 9to5Mac. So that's very good, because we of course know that this is the device with 6.1 inch OLED screen, the exact same display basically as on the iPhone 14, with also the same notch. It would get a 48 megapixel camera. It would get Apple's first in-house designed modem for both 5G and Wi-Fi, supposedly with some huge power savings, especially in low power mode. So a lot of interesting stuff happening there. Then this is also something we've only heard recently, and Mark Gurman seems to be committing to that, would be refreshed 11 and 13-inch iPad Air models known as J607 and J637. Maybe those like code names suggest they could be M4 powered, because J6 is kind of like the M4 start, but of course it doesn't mean too much. Apple can use whatever brand, like code names they want. You can see the Mac Mini here is actually a J773. I don't know if those are M4 devices. My speculation would be that they could still be M2 based, maybe at that point with the full 10-core GPU. They could be highly bint M4 devices. Maybe Apple has some M4s where they would disable both one CPU core and one or two GPU cores, which currently we only actually have CPU bint M4s on the iPad Pro. So maybe the launch launch of the MacBook Air and the new iPad Airs would be a good way to utilize some not so perfect M4 dies. And Tippomaster, to what you said, which is that Apple could eventually create M4, like let's say M5, and maybe they would call it an M5 Plus, right? And my speculation here would be that they would like maybe cut off the two of extra efficiency cores, so that goes a little bit into some multi-threading stuff, and maybe then M5 goes all the way up to 12 or even like 14 GPU cores, and then the base M5, the non-plus version, would then have like 9-10 GPU cores, something like that. Of course, it would still be proportionally still close to the plus version, as we have seen with the iPhone, the 18 Pro, of course, only having one extra GPU cores versus the A18. But yeah, I see some potential here to maybe give you a few more cores here and there. Like maybe at some point Apple could start utilizing better memory for the higher end versions, because they with them having more GPU cores, they could also be more in need of memory bandwidth. Of course, we know that Apple would then also start maybe cutting down on cache, as they've done with the A18, which of course does make some decent amount of sense. You probably don't even need all that crazy close to 4,000 single core in Geekbench 6 from the M4 on like the iPad Air models down the road, and especially if the M5 is already faster than the M4, maybe it just stands to reason to make like a plus version that gives you all those crazy benefits, maybe like another 10%, 4500 in Geekbench 6 or something like that, and then like an like a base version that gives you like 4200 or something like that. So not even too big of a difference, but still like some way to push enthusiasts to the Pro versions, which would be of course like crazy for Apple to have all those different dies, all that different like parallel chip development. But now that we know Apple does build essentially like C cores, right? That's what AMD calls them. When AMD basically takes the real design of Zen 4 or Zen 5 and then cuts cache basically in half and then reduces frequency, they call that Zen 4 or Zen 5C. Apple created basically the A18 Pro, which with their main chip and their main cores, and then they created an A18 with essentially a C version of their own cores. Less cache, they didn't even clock it that much low, which is pretty impressive that it can sustain all those high clock speeds with so much less cache. Usually cache still helps even with clock speeds. It doesn't just help with IPC, but also to maintain higher clock speeds, because why would you target high clock speeds if you didn't even have the cache to keep the data flowing back and forth? So yeah, it's very impressive what Apple has done, and it would stand to reason that maybe at some point they could start differentiating between an M5 and an M5, let's call it Plus for the sake of this discussion, similar to how they're currently differentiating between the A18 and A18 Pro. But at some point I should like create a graph where I make my predictions, I compare them with predictions from like Apple Jesus, Mark Gurman and stuff like that. I think that will be very interesting. Next, there will be new Magic Keyboards for the updated iPad Air line. I don't know if those Magic Keyboards are supposed to be any different than the ones we have already gotten for the M4 iPad Pro. Might be that those are slightly updated models that will support both the M4 iPad Pros and the new iPad Airs, but the last gen of Magic Keyboards for the M4 would not support the iPad Airs. And the reason I speculate that could be that, of course, that the iPad Air, contrary to what its name suggests, is actually thicker than the iPad Pro. So again, take it with a grain of salt. Don't know what exactly can change beyond just giving it basically all the functionality of the Magic keyboards that were designed for the M4 iPad Pro, which of course includes the function row and things like that, the larger trackpad. But let's see. Maybe Apple will find some way to differentiate them further. There will also be an upgraded AirTag item finder accessory. He does not specify if it will come in the same form factor. I know a lot of like item finders have kind of become very popular in like that credit card form factor. So you basically slide it into your wallet. Maybe Apple would create one that is specifically like that. Maybe they would still create like the old AirTag design. Obviously, that one helps sell some accessories as well. And beyond that, they could just then create something that would satisfy a market that might have previously not been too happy with like the little hockey pucks, basically, that are the current generation of AirTags. I have a lot of them. I still have 3 that are not activated to anything, but maybe if Apple creates one that is like a credit card, I would actually be interested. And of course, beyond that, he does predict M5 Max for late 2025, new Apple Watches that would include an updated SE model and an Ultra 3. And of course, the iPhone 17 line, which will be interesting to see what kind of rumors we get before its release. Obviously, the iPhone 16 line just dropped, so that will be fascinating. We, of course, know that there will be like the iPhone Air. We suspect that the iPhone 18 line will then have like foldables in there. Let's see how much of that is actually true. But that's kind of the state of the discussion. And new Mac Studio and Mac Pro with some versions of M4 chip. My speculation would be M4 Max and M4 Ultra. And he says they may take longer to arrive. So there might still be some chance that they arrive maybe technically in the middle of 2025. He says that Mac Pro would only go on sale in the second half of 2025. So I don't know. Maybe there could be different launch dates still, or maybe Apple gets a little bit on quicker on their timeline and actually delivers us finally an updated Mac Pro. It's kind of embarrassing to have a $7,000 Mac with a chip with such inferior single core performance. And like when you even look at M3 Max and what it delivers in terms of ray tracing performance, because of course, unlike the M2 Ultra, it has hardware accelerated ray tracing. M4 Max will, of course, take that even further. If we look at, for example, the A18 Pro doubling the ray tracing performance of the A17 Pro. So, yeah, there is a lot to be dissatisfied with by not getting Mac Studio and Mac Pros updates as soon as possible. That's basically it for hardware predictions from Mark Gurman. He does not fully stop here. He gives us one extra date. Maybe that date could actually be the date where the event happens or something like that. Or maybe it's a few days after the event and Apple talks about it during the event still. And that is the official Apple Intelligence release date with iOS 18.1 being October 28th. That, of course, will come with Apple's first wave of Apple Intelligence features that include stuff like writing tools, a new Siri UI, but unfortunately not too much new Siri stuff, notification summaries, memory creation in photos, cleanup in photos, and intelligent breakthrough with notification. And no idea what that means. I mean, you have like notifications, like response suggestions and stuff like that, I believe, coming, but intelligent breakthrough is a little weird way to put it. Maybe you guys know what is meant here. Yeah, but beyond that, that's actually it for like what new stuff we have gotten. Of course, we have discussed like the new stuff that is coming in 18.2. We've talked about the iPhone SE 4. You guys, of course, feel free to ask me any questions you might have about any upcoming hardware or software, my thoughts. Always consider, of course, that I'm coming here from Germany, which means my exposure to Apple intelligence will likely stay very limited until some point next year. But yeah, there isn't that much extra juicy stuff otherwise. So thank you, of course, to Mark Gurman for feeding us. But that's not all I actually wanted to talk about with you today, because there is something new that I haven't yet watched, and I have reacted to the initial Lunar Lake reviews by many YouTube channels, but I actually didn't find stuff that really gave me a lot of comprehensive data. And just today, Max Tech, a channel we of course know and respect here, just published their Lunar Lake versus Apple M3 comparison. They subtitle it, "How did they do this?" So I suspect that the Lunar Lake laptop probably fared pretty well against what I assume will be Apple's M3 MacBook Air, or maybe the 14-inch MacBook Pro. I mean, there isn't that much else in terms of choice, but maybe they will choose the Air because of pricing. We know, of course, you can get a lot more storage for a lot less from other laptop makers. The same with memory. Usually where Apple gives you 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, others might already be giving you 16 gigs of RAM and a full terabyte, not even 512 gigabytes. So Apple definitely has some room here to offer us extra value starting with the October event. And I would just be very interested in seeing how versus M3 Lunar Lake is currently faring, and maybe that will give us some glimpses into how M4 compares, because we already have some M4 data thanks to the existence of the M4 iPad Pro. But of course, there are also going to be some speculative benefits, like higher base RAM configurations with M4 MacBook Pros starting November, potentially more ports on something like the base M4 MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini. So stuff that could further increase value, even though, of course, our performance targets are something we can already kind of compute from here. When it comes to battery life, it becomes a little bit more complicated. We know that M4 is more efficient, but of course it gives you also higher performance, but it also has 6 efficiency cores rather than 4. So there's a good chance that some tasks might be able to stay on the efficiency cores rather than having to spread themselves out onto the performance cores. So again, a lot of stuff we can speculate about, but for now we do have Lunar Lake versus M3, and that to me was like very interesting to react to. I don't actually think I need it any faster than like regular speed. Those guys talk pretty fast. I talk pretty fast. And before I start, we've been streaming for a little over half an hour. So a small reminder to everyone watching to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so, liking the video if you're enjoying the content, commenting, making this a lively live chat where I can interact with you guys, sharing out the video to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Do like Max Maximus did and leave a super chat or a super sticker in a small donation to support this channel. Do like Angelica and Max Maximus and become a Mark Tech Pro Max supporter right here on YouTube, or another form of channel membership. There's, I believe, a cheaper channel membership than Mark Tech Pro Max. And of course, you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. And Relay also joining the chat, a very, very active supporter in recent days and weeks. That's very, very much appreciated. Welcome. And without further ado, I think we can get started. And while I, of course, keep reacting, as always, let me know if the audio is all right for you, if the video is working all right for you, stuff like that. You guys know I can be pretty paranoid about my tech working all well for you.
Lunar Lake versus Apple's M3 chip. This comparison has been 4 years in the making. Yes, ever since Apple ditched Intel for their own Apple Silicon chips, Intel's been working on this Lunar Lake.
I mean, they have been working on different new architectures for literally like decades anyway, but I guess you could make the sense that Lunar Lake currently is like a 4 performance, 4 efficiency core design with 4 GPU cores. It's a very tight tightly integrated SoC with on-die memory. So Intel even cannot just ship out a Lunar Lake die. They actually have to ship it out with the memory on top. So that's why it only comes in 16 and 32 gigabyte configurations. It's of course still it's a 3 nanometer based. It's a mix of N3B and TSMC 6 nanometer for the I/O controller stuff, which doesn't scale too well with newer nodes anyway. Doesn't save too much extra energy. So this is why it's still like technically a 2-die chip. And yeah, that's its basic design. We of course know that for now it should probably be the most efficient x86 chip on the market. It's very good that they specify x86 because I doubt it comes close to Apple's M4. And it has a lot of AI compute. When they talk about 120 platform tops, they're talking combining the GPU, CPU tops on top of the NPU tops. The massive leap in graphics is, of course, over their last gen Meteor Lake processors, which fared pretty well when they came out, but now of course that we have Strix point out from AMD, Intel needed to of course something that performs better, and they have exceptional core performance. Should be noted that they don't take a single core crown. They don't have technically the absolute best efficiency cores, nor definitely the best performance cores. Maybe by x86 standards, though, you could say that the efficiency cores are really, really good. Not versus Apple's necessarily, but yes, by x86 standards. In fact, we have seen some tasks apparently where the efficiency cores are so apparently good in some ways that they sometimes run at higher frequencies than the P cores. I don't know what that means for Windows itself. Maybe it's a bug by the Windows scheduler. This is why offering two very different core types on a chip is actually pretty dangerous, with Microsoft being very, very bad still at supporting stuff like that. But yeah, those are the base promises here.
Brand new redesign, and based on all the reviews as well as our review that we just did, this is absolutely killer. So in this video, I'm gonna compare the Asus ZenBook S14 with the Lunar Lake 258V chip compared to Apple's 14-inch MacBook Pro with the
Okay, so active cooling device, not bad. 70 watt-hour battery, which a lot of Lunar Lake devices, this is one thing that I dislike about recent Windows trends, is there aren't devices actually with like small batteries in the way that I would actually love to see like very compact devices. But because we have kind of lost 13-inch and especially 12-inch devices, so now that everything is around 14 inches anyway, of course, it's easy to pack in like 60, 70, maybe even like 75 watt-hour batteries. But I would love to see like a netbook style device that still has all the performance of proper Lunar Lake. It's a little bit of a shame that we have all kind of coalesced to this design that is very MacBook Air-like, isn't it? Right? I mean, even the MacBook Pro here is like notably thicker. So it's just fascinating to me that we kind of like, and all of these devices started like above $1,000, even though obviously when you just look at core count, you can get so much more for so much less. But in devices that are generally built worse, have worse screens, stuff like that. So yeah, I just would love like an $800 Arrow Lake product that was like really thin and light, and was like a great go-to solution for people buying somewhat premium but smaller Windows laptops.
3 chip, yes, this thing costs $1,600 brand new.
Yeah, so again, what did I tell you? Like, when I told you 8 gigabytes plus 256 gigabytes from Apple, that's of course the MacBook Air. When we are looking at the ZenBook, at a similar competition, then they usually give you 16 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte. But because here we already have 512 gigabyte on Apple's side, they're of course happy to give you 32 gigs of RAM. I know, like, to me, it just doesn't make sense. Like, I hope they aren't comparing a 8 gigabyte MacBook Pro just to say, oh, they're similar in price, because you can get a 16-inch MacBook Pro for like 1700, and at that point, like, don't forget the M3 will still be faster in many ways here. Yeah, it's a little bit iffy. Like, don't get me wrong, I fully understand that the value is here with like the RAM and the storage, but there are other things to consider: speakers, microphones, like build quality, like all those things that are much more difficult to put on a spec sheet.
Well, this actually costs $1,500, and it has a 1TB SSD, double than what you get in the MacBook, and 32 gigs of RAM. 4 times more RAM than what you get in the base MacBook Pro for $100 less. Of course, you can find deals on this MacBook Pro on Amazon. Like right now, it's $300 off.
Yep. And what do you get if you take $300 off from the 16 gigabyte configuration? You get the exact same price as this laptop, and making them much more comparable in real world performance.
Link down in the description, but in this video, this is gonna be very interesting to see which one is better, comparing everything, especially performance. But the biggest thing I'm excited to test is actually the battery life, since Lunar Lake is known to be really good so far in all of the reviews. So right now I have both of these charged up to 100%. I'm gonna go ahead and unplug these chargers. Both of these are set to the highest performance, and I also maxed out the display brightness, which actually gives an advantage to the Lunar Lake laptop since it has a 500 nit display compared to 600 nit.
That's a weird choice. Why not just like max them? Like, why not put them both at like 400? Like, okay, this is already one choice to help the Windows laptop. That's so weird thing to do.
Standard brightness on the MacBook Pro. But before I get into the displays and the performance and everything, I want to compare the exteriors. First of all, you can see we have the classic silver right here on the MacBook Pro, and I love Asus's ZenBook, the new Ceraluminum finish with this really cool design. This, by the way, is
I've touched it once. I really didn't like just how matte it felt. Almost felt like a cover, but I guess like it's not like it's a less premium solution than just aluminum.
Fingerprint resistant. It's an absolutely amazing finish. We have it right there on the top cover. Both of these are still really nice. And even though these are both 14-inch laptops, you can see that the ZenBook is a little bit less tall going this way. You can see that. As far as width, they're about the same. As far as thickness, the ZenBook is actually thinner, which is kind of mind-blowing.
It's not mind-blowing. This is the MacBook Pro. This is the device designed to give you a larger battery. It's designed to give you like a really good sustained performance. It's designed to give you amazing speakers. There is a reason why it's as thick as it is.
Both on the bigger side and the thinner side compared to the flat MacBook Pro. That's actually really crazy. In terms of the ports, I actually have to give this one to the MacBook Pro because it has MagSafe 3, so it's a separate connector for charging, which is actually very convenient, and 2 Thunderbolt ports just like the Asus ZenBook has. You have the headphone jack right there, while you have an HDMI on the left side on the ZenBook. And switching over to the other side, the MacBook has the HDMI on this side, but it also has an SD card slot, while the ZenBook chooses to give you an old USB.
I hate USB-A inclusion. It just encourages all those accessories like regular mice to stay with like USB-A, like cables in the box and stuff like that. It's just so silly. Just make it a 10 gigabit USB-C port. What are you losing here?
USB-A port, which is definitely useful for compatibility, but I think the MacBook wins out with the additional SD card. Now, one thing that impresses me about the ZenBook is that just like Apple's really good hinges that open up with one hand, one finger, just like that, they've also greatly improved it and made it one hand just like that, but they've added Windows Hello, which logs you in automatically. I wish Apple would add that to the MacBook.
Can we please stop complaining about that? Like it's a MacBook. You turn it on by clicking something on the keyboard or on the trackpads. Like, you already have to actually use it. You have your hands there where you can also enable Touch ID. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Face ID, but Windows Hello is not as comprehensively secure as Face ID, not even close. And there's a reason why still some laptops actually do like fingerprint plus Windows Hello.
Pro. For now, we just only have that Touch ID power button. Now, before we jump into the displays, I want to talk about the keyboards and the trackpads. I really love Apple's MacBook Pro's Magic Keyboard.
I really dislike this design from ASUS. I know it's obviously not something that defines value, but I really hate it when the keyboard is this exact same gray tone. But yeah, to everyone's, I guess, his
feels really nice
or
and
hers.
clicky. Now, it does feel okay, but I'm not getting that really satisfying tactile
Yeah,
click
it hasn't
this.
had the best keyboards for a while. I still have to say, like, next to Apple's keyboards, I think my favorite are actually the Surface keyboards. Like, I think they're super stable. They give off a nice sound. I think they have a good mix of actual travel space, but also not being so tall that I'm wondering are you wasting space on my laptop. Yeah, like ASUS is okay.
ZenBook's keyboard. It's still a really great keyboard. The backlighting also works very well. I have it set manually to be nice and bright on here. The MacBook also has backlighting, which turns on automatically when it gets dark, but for now, I'm just gonna turn off the backlighting on the ZenBook. But first, I want to show you a dash cam that has the best 4K and HD achieves great clip and pinned comments. You have really nice gesture support.
Again, I have nothing against watching ads from content we steal on this channel, but whenever I know their ads are a little long, and I definitely don't want to watch it in full.
Clicking and other stuff, it's the best, but I really don't like this ZenBook trackpad because it uses the old diving board design where it's really tough.
And again, this is where Microsoft actually has stepped up their game and gives you a great trackpad. And again, those are small value additions that are really hard to put on a spec sheet. Like, oh, it's a trackpad you can touch anywhere, right? And oh, the multi-touch is super duper well optimized and stuff like that. So yeah, again, it's not like I'm excusing Apple giving you 4 times less memory here and half the storage, but there are reasons that go into this device being still pretty expensive to make.
To click it at the very top and super easy at the bottom.
Guys, let me know. Am I totally crazy here? Am I completely downplaying like this device? Like, because to me, yeah, I fully admit that there is value here, of course, with stuff like 32 gigs of RAM, a full terabyte of storage. I'm not denying any of that. But my question always is it actually like defining the device that it has more storage and RAM? Because there are half a dozen other Windows laptops with very similar configurations now that look better. If Microsoft were to get off its ass, we could actually combine Arrow Lake with a good trackpad for once. And also, like, even like what I dislike with ASUS is like they have all those speaker grills that give you a lot of hope, but then the speakers don't actually end up being too great. While with Apple, you have like those very subdued speaker designs, but actually like phenomenal speakers.
Like these trackpads. And now it's time to test the speaker quality with our classic Where We Started song to see which one has the better speakers.
Yeah, it's... The bass difference is like, I know it's obviously gonna depend on like also the microphone and stuff like that, but you can just feel that like whatever bass is happening here, it's just basically not basically. Jesus, I'm so stupid. It's basically not getting to the microphone. While here, the bass is so strong, you can feel almost like the mic reverberating from it. Also, by the way, I don't know if this is an OLED screen or not, but like this is lower reflectivity and higher contrast somehow. Yeah. And of course, higher peak brightness. And a better aspect ratio too.
All right, guys, that was not even a competition.
Nope.
The MacBook Pro smoked the ZenBook in terms of everything. The bass, the vocals, very clear and natural.
Yeah.
The high range of
The
frequency.
stereo aspect, the separation of highs and lows, the existence of lows. Yeah, it wasn't even close.
Just dominated. Now, while I have this open, I actually want to jump into the display quality comparison because I'm noticing something very, very big. Even though this has an OLED display with 500 nits of brightness,
Yep.
I'm actually seeing
Better blacks.
this one look better with deeper blacks because
Yep.
I'm looking at the ZenBook's display. I'm seeing gray all over it. And why is that? Well, because it's a touchscreen. You can see that
Yep.
right here, which is a really cool advantage, but
Nope, it's not. I legitimately have to say, after using years and years of my MacBook, like literally with my iPad on the side and interacting with my iPad basically with my fingers exclusively, I have never felt the need to once touch my MacBook. Like, I know people have said, like, look, you get so used to a touchscreen, you want to touch your laptop, and Apple doesn't give you a touchscreen. It never translated to me. Like, I think the older I got, the more anti-touchscreen I actually have become.
usually touchscreen layers mess with the deep blacks to the point where this mini LED MacBook Pro looks even better. It doesn't have a touchscreen, but the display quality here looks really nice with 600 nits of brightness. Yes, this is not an HDR video, and it actually definitely looks brighter. And part of the reason why the MacBook looks like it has deeper blacks is because the display on the ZenBook is more reflective. I'm looking at my reflection in the screen, and it is so much brighter on the ZenBook.
This is like double the difference between like the latest Galaxy Ultra, which I've praised time and time again for a very good anti-reflective coating, and like other like smartphone flagships. This is way beyond even that. And at least with other smartphones, you can argue, well, you preserve some of the like the good colors. The Galaxy Ultra is slightly more subdued than it was in the past. But here, because it's actually such a good glossy screen still, and because you don't have that touch layer, you actually get better colors, better contrast, a higher brightness, and like with the higher contrast that I already mentioned, you get deeper blacks even versus like an OLED screen to a degree.
Right now, it's a crazy difference. However, one of the downsides with the mini LED local dimming zones kind of bleeds out around.
Yeah, like it is an issue. Like, yet I have to say, after the first 6-8 months after using my MacBook Pro and my iPad Pro, I never actually encountered that. To like, I guess I keep my displays actually like at very low brightness when I'm in a like low light scenario anyway, and in high brightness it obviously you cannot see that display bleed. So I have to say, Apple's decision to temporarily go for mini LED before they adopted technology like tandem OLED was very smart. And of course, now in the future we can look forward to potentially an M5 or an M6 MacBook Pro being powered by a tandem OLED screen, which would be so freaking good.
Bright text, like in this scenario right here, you can see all of this glow on the MacBook Pro's display, while the ZenBook doesn't have it because it's true OLED. In terms of the actual quality, the MacBook Pro has a slightly sharper display, 3K resolution compared to basically 2.9K. It's a very small difference, and both of them have 120 Hertz capable displays. And with that said, let's jump into the performance testing. But first, I do want to do a quick battery checkup to see the battery life. And oh wow, the ZenBook's at 100%. Well, yep, the MacBook Pro's also at 100%. This usually never happens. Like the old Intels, they would already be at like 90-95% after we did all of the different physical changes and difference testing before we get into
you
performance.
barely had those devices open. You played one video, not even full for speaker tests.
But it's keeping up. This is super impressive. And now let's jump into Geekbench 6 to test out the CPU performance. We can see we have the new Lunar Lake Ultra 7 258V with 32 gigs of RAM. Yes, that is crazy because we have only 8 on the M3.
I guess the main, like they're saying, how did they do this? I think that will maybe they will do like one of their tests where they keep like 10, 20 Chrome tabs open, and then they will slow down like a video editing test or something like that on the MacBook.
0.05 gigahertz for the clock speed. Let's run the CPU test. And here we go, we have the scores, and surprisingly, Lunar Lake is actually not that far behind.
I mean,
the M3 chip is about 17% faster in terms of single core, and only 10% faster in terms of multi-core. I'm actually really surprised because
I mean, are you really surprised though? Like, do I need to remind you that M3 came out exactly 1 year ago, and they're based on the same node, and Lunar Lake actually consumes more power than M3? Like don't get me wrong, it's objectively better than Meteor Lake and stuff like that, but are you really impressed, or are you really just happy that it's not bad finally?
8-core chip, 4 P cores and 4 E cores, which matches the M3, but usually Windows laptops like to add a lot more cores.
I mean, like, let me do my math on my iPad, as I always do, because Spotlight Search always sources up some private information from me whenever I open up during a stream. 3135 divided by 2687, that's a 17% difference in single core results. That's not too insignificant. Like, considering this device actually comes out a year later.
To compete, this is really impressive. In terms of actual web browsing performance, I have Speedometer 3.0 opened up on both of these. Let's run them. 39.8 on the MacBook compared to 27.
This is a test where like just also Safari performs really well with it. Wait, did they run Chrome on it on the Mac?
On both of these, let's run them. 39.8 on the MacBook compared to 27.
Okay, they ran Chrome. Crazy.
The M3 is now beating it by a huge margin. Now to test out web-based app performance more accurately, we have this project in Figma, which was sent to us from 500 Designs, one of the best studios.
Which, by the way, like for efficiency testing, like what did Apple say during the last WWDC? That Safari gives you like 2 hours longer surfing than Chrome. So if you actually want to make this a much more fair comparison, you kind of should, like, considering that like people on macOS don't just have access to Safari, but are actually probably much more likely to use Safari. And I guess you could argue that maybe some certain tasks might need like Chromium, and then you could switch to Chrome, but yeah.
LA. The first test is to basically zoom in on something and see how fast the content loads. Oh,
my issue with that is though, like, this is one of those, like the way they run this test like reminds me a lot of when like 4 or 5 years ago people were testing like photo editing with like 124 30 megapixel image, and they were like, look how quick I can zoom into that. I'm like, yeah bro, that has been like smooth for like 5 years at that point. Time to actually, it's either time to admit that you don't need to benchmark photo editing, which is not true, or to actually like do more intensive photo editing, like editing a bunch of images at the same time, which, for example, a wedding photographer might do. Maybe bumping up the resolution a little bit and stuff like that. Definitely going from JPEGs to RAW, please. Stuff like that. Otherwise, the benchmark, it's similar to how like when you say like sometimes like, oh, the proper way to test CPUs in gaming is to go to 720p or even like 480p, so you can leverage like because the GPU isn't fully like utilized, you can have a much better chance of fully utilizing the CPU with all those frames. The GPU is no longer bottleneck, and like, yeah, but who the F wants to play at 480p on a modern device at this point? Like, what's the point in such a benchmark? So, and similar to how here it's like, zoom into this, like, I hardly believe that Meteor Lake would really struggle in this test either.
You go, it just loaded on. Okay, let me test out a different spot just in case. I mean, dang, that's already loaded. Like, yeah, this thing's super snappy as well. But the main test is to actually export 12 of these different.
Let me guess, the Windows laptop might actually be faster at that because it probably has faster storage.
Layers to see.
So my prediction is it will be 10-15% faster than the MacBook Pro. The MacBook Pro doing all its CPU tasks faster, but then the actual exporting through the storage will be faster on the Windows laptop.
Which one finishes first? And by the way, I'm actually actually hearing the fans spinning up
Yeah,
on
because even though it's still a low-powered chip, it's configured to run it up to 30 watts. Maybe it will try to hit a more regular 18 watts or something like that. Apple's base M chips are like 12 to 20 watt range. So we're talking literally, like, depending if you look up from the MacBook, it's 50% more power consumption, or it's 33% down in terms of power consumption from this.
Lunar Lake laptop, whereas I've heard nothing at all from the MacBook Pro so far. All right, and the Lunar Lake laptop just finished 1 minute and 58 seconds. Let's go ahead and test it on the MacBook Pro. And the MacBook Pro just finished 1 minute and 37 seconds compared to 1 minute 58 on the Lunar Lake ZenBook S14.
I guess the CPU difference is just substantial enough.
Faster in this test, even with only 8 gigs of RAM. Now, with that said, I do want to do some graphics tests. Let's do Geekbench 6 with OpenCL.
I think this is where they're actually neck and neck. I remember seeing some Geekbench.
And holy smokes, guys, the M3 is scoring over twice as high. 47,800 compared to 23,000 in OpenCL.
That's crazy,
on
chat.
Lunar Lake. And I also ran it with
I'm now XQC. That's crazy, chat. Half an hour of silence. That's crazy, chat. Half an hour of silence. That's crazy, chat.
And it's still like 80% faster, 27,500. Now, this, of course, is Geekbench 6's graphics test.
Steel Nomad Lite, I believe this is where they were almost neck and neck in the test that I saw.
Do something else that's a little bit more fair and is a more realistic benchmark.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, 3D Mark's Wildlife Extreme.
No, Wildlife Extreme is so freaking like... It's the same bullshit that I always talk about when people benchmark Cinebench R23 when Cinebench 2024 exists. Guys, why do you believe the developers bothered to make a new version? Like, do you think that the old version might be outdated, not be properly optimized for the latest APIs and generation of hardware? Like, what would be the point? Like, no, use fucking... Sorry, I don't want to swear. Use freaking Steel Nomad Lite.
So let's go ahead and run it. And there you go. It looks like the M3 is 58% faster, 49.6...
I mean, that's still insane. Like, that's... Especially considering that this chip, I believe, has technically faster memory bandwidth. Now, I know this is not the highest end, so you could probably get like 10% more. Like, but it's not like even in terms of GPU cores, I don't think there is a binning down on the 258V.
FPS compared to 31.36. Now, since Wildlife Extreme is more of a mobile gaming test, I do want to test the new Steel Nomad Lite, which is basically for modern AAA games. So let's run that. And there you go. We have our results, and it looks like the M3 chip is still 26%.
Yeah, that to me, yeah, this is, I guess, by Apple standards, this is neck and neck. Considering that M4 is coming and it will largely increase it by almost 20% in stuff that doesn't involve ray tracing. We are looking at a 50% advantage for the M4 if that one comes out at around 30 FPS, which definitely doesn't promise good things for like Intel and AMD for that matter. Like, if you just really want to compare the chips, I'm not saying that people will start buying MacBooks left and right for the GPU performance, but don't forget, like, some people will say, well, AMD is soon coming out with Strix Halo, and I'm like, yeah, and Apple is soon coming out with M4 Pro and M4 Max, and Apple has, like, I believe, like, close to 2.5 times, like when you normalize for raster performance, the ray tracing performance already with even the M3 versus what AMD is doing. So it's crazy. It's crazy, chat. Half an hour of silence.
And the Lunar Lake in terms of graphics performance. And now let's move on to some throttling and thermal testing. This is gonna be Cinebench 2024. Let's do a 10-minute stress test right away. The MacBook Pro has finished. We have a score of 678, and we still are running the test
I believe from what I saw, it would be around 620. And
the
the
Lunar
result
Lake
here.
laptop. It's got a little bit more to go. And there you go. The test is
Oh,
finished.
okay, a
We
little
have
below 600.
13.5% faster on the M3 chip compared to Lunar Lake. I'm actually
Why didn't they never give us single core results for Cinebench, I wonder though? Like that shit is easy to test. If you're already running a 10-minute multi-core test, just run a single core test once.
surprised it's not that big of a difference. And then finally, we also have DaVinci Resolve. We have a 5-minute 4K export, and here the M3 finished in 1 minute and 35 seconds compared to 2 minutes on the Lunar Lake.
I still am struggling to see where this title came from. How did they do this? I guess the battery drain will be so much lower than previous generation of x86 chips.
MacBook S14. So it looks like the MacBook has been faster in basically every single test so far.
Guys, I'm not saying we're wrapping this up because obviously a lot can happen in the next 3 minutes. But while I still have all of you here, let me know, is there something else I might react to? Some piece of news or rumors that I might have missed? Some thoughts of yours that you would like to see me comment on? A disagreement we might have that you would like to see clear up? I know it's usually most people here in the chat are not that adversarial. Like I believe we've had like 1 negative comment in the last 7 videos or something like that. But yeah, I would love to see like just what you think, what I might have missed, because I haven't been paying too much attention to Apple news as I would have liked to with work, with all the crazy world news. So I just would love to hear if maybe you guys have seen something that I have missed.
But do keep in mind that it is more expensive while only having 512 gigs of SSD storage and only 8 gigs of RAM, while this guy right here is $100 cheaper with 1 terabyte of SSD.
Yeah, but we have already established that you can get this one for $12.99. So at least give Apple some respect and say you can get 16 gigs of RAM here for around $1,500 pretty easily.
And 32
I continue to say that Apple overcharges by default around 15% pricing, and then obviously they overcharge a lot more on the RAM and storage, because obviously if you overcharge 50% on RAM and storage, that's still only like 10% of the overall device cost. Yeah, but yeah, once you add RAM and storage, now the overpricing goes from 10-15% to more like 25-30%, and this is why Apple almost expects any value-oriented customer to wait until like a $15.99 device is more like a $13.99 device, or as they have shown, like if you buy it close to a new generation or even a little after a new generation comes out, this is where you, and of course if you're willing to buy used, now you're getting a lot of value. And as we have already made clear, there's a lot of value here that is hard to describe. The fact that the fans don't even spring up on this. The fact that it's faster across CPU and GPU, and I'm not quite sure about Neural Engine, but I would be surprised if Apple's ability to just utilize all SoC resources wouldn't result in faster AI performance on M3, definitely once you consider M4. And we have, of course, seen all the small differences that you might never consider, like, oh, that screen is 20% brighter, but also better anti-reflective coating. Oh, and it doesn't have that dirty touch layer in between. So you actually end up with a screen that it gives you notably better performance in some ways. Of course, nicer trackpad, nicer keyboard, better speakers, better microphones. Would have loved to see a comparison with the front camera if that has finally improved. Asus has been like really off and on with like their camera quality on laptops. I believe they've had the time, I'm not sure if it was Asus or some other company, who like they even removed the front-facing camera on their gaming laptops, basically saying, oh, you don't need it here, and they made like the top bezel super small. Obviously you cannot afford that in like a device like this, which a lot of people will use for things like Zoom calls, but I would be surprised if they finally surpassed Apple's not even too great front-facing camera. Given how large like the notch is, I would at least like to see maybe an upgrade to 1440p with a larger sensor and things like that.
of RAM. And just to show you that difference, you can't even get 32 gigs of RAM on the M3 MacBook Pro. You can do 24 with 1 terabyte. That's $2,200 if you want to almost match the specs that you get with the ZenBook.
I mean, there is a problem there. You match the specs, yes, you can talk about it that way, but the 24 gigabyte MacBook will outperform any 32 gigabyte Windows laptop. And I know this will actually be probably the best 32 gigabyte Windows laptop because it actually utilizes its RAM like unified memory the way Apple does it, because it's one continuous SoC, even unlike what AMD does. This is of course on die memory, but yeah, come on. Once you're talking such a high configuration on the MacBook, you're talking about a lot better machine too.
For $1,500, that's $700 more retail price. So I've got to say, all in all, I've been super impressed with the Asus ZenBook S14.
I feel like they wanted to have at least one test where it just definitively won out. I'm surprised they haven't done that test where they open up Chrome tabs and then run the benchmarks. But I guess respect for not doing it thus far. Not sure if that will change.
With the value that it gives it, especially with the OLED display, everything else, this has been great. But the last thing we got to compare and test is the final battery life results. So let's go ahead and check out the ZenBook.
I was afraid for a moment they might actually run that test.
68%. Wow, that's actually pretty impressive. And then moment of truth for the MacBook Pro, we have 68%.
Almost nice. Don't forget, the Mac was running at all times at 20% higher brightness. Don't forget, it was delivering basically universally higher performance across every single benchmark. Granted, it also gave it the luxury to actually finish those benchmarks quicker. But yeah, for those 32% consumed battery life, it did deliver you more.
Exactly the same battery life. I cannot believe this, guys. Lunar Lake, Intel, you guys did it. Congratulations. 4 years
You did it 1 year later before the release of M4 Max. Congratulations.
later, after Apple Silicon, you guys have been getting beat down with your x86 chips, but you've proven that it doesn't even matter. x86 versus ARM, this is an x86 chip, and the battery life is absolutely insane, matching the M3 14-inch MacBook Pro, even though we actually ran some of the tests longer on this machine because it took longer, it was slower.
Yeah, I mean, but
for example,
that's the nature of slower chips. It's like you cannot fault Usain Bolt for finishing a sprint faster than I would and potentially consuming less energy because of that. While I am so snail slow in comparison that my metabolism doesn't even activate to such a degree. Now, I might die if I try to get it up to that level, but yeah, that's the nature of testing.
that final stress test in Cinebench, we still have the same battery life. Holy smokes. Intel, good job. You guys have redeemed yourselves.
I honestly cannot say bad things. It's interesting here that Lunar Lake is, of course, kind of a one-off. We are going to continue with Arrow Lake parts with a lot more cores. It's going to be interesting if we'll see such a low core config again anytime soon from Intel, because now that AMD is giving you Strix Point with 4+8 cores, maybe Intel will just be forced to give you at least 4+6 or something like that. Also, of course, now that Apple is giving you 4+6, of course, Apple giving you 10 GPU cores here, hopefully giving you 12 GPU cores on DM5. Of course, given the power consumption inside this device, it's more competing with Apple's M4 Pro chips that are coming up, not in price, but in raw power consumption. So yeah, while while I still believe that Apple is very stingy when it comes to the amount of RAM and storage they give you at any given price point, I think this testing shows why they can, to a degree, afford that. Because if the pricing was the exact same, like across RAM, storage, stuff like that, but then the MacBook was like faster, better speakers, better build, whatever, like who would even consider this in comparison? The reason why it has to give you so much storage and RAM, potentially at even lower prices, is because it needs to catch up somewhat. And again, you can also see here, of course, there are differences that weren't quite covered. Like this doesn't just offer you a nice 14-inch screen, but it offers you a screen that has a more friendly aspect ratio for reading and stuff. Let me actually go to the website for the ZenBook. What is it? ZenBook S14? ZenBook S14? Yeah, with Lunar Lake. So I guess that's it. 16.99 in euros. Let's look at what did I actually wanted to look up? I wanted to look up how large its battery is. So it comes with so the 258V is actually the highest end version it has. Well, 256V and 258V, their only difference is the actual RAM configuration. So you have a nice 3K screen, 16:10, while Apple's is actually even slightly tall, while Apple's is almost 3:2. So definitely nicer here. Apple's screen is actually 16+10 plus all the room you get around the notch. So that's how you can imagine it. By the way, the max brightness claim by MaxTech here was wrong. The 500 nits is for HDR brightness. So the actual the actual battery drain we experienced that was exactly the same 32% actually came from the Mac running at 50% higher brightness levels at 600 nits versus 400 nits here. Yeah, you can take it as you want. Yeah, and there's no configuration that actually goes to 500 nits of SDR brightness. That's the entire point of why Apple targeted tandem OLED. They wanted to give you a very high brightness screen. They wanted to give you all the benefits of OLED, but all these OLEDs that currently exist, even some of them supposedly calling themselves tandem OLED, like in the Dell XPS, they just don't give you that brightness that Apple is delivering. We do have 1632 gigabytes of LPDDR5X. This is actually faster memory than what Apple uses in both the M3 and the upcoming M4. We know this is like 8533 megatransfers memory. Apple uses 6400 on the M3 and 7500 on the M4. Would we only have 1 terabyte configuration? So technically you could argue Apple offers you more versatility by giving you a 2 terabyte option, but I wouldn't of course put too much into that. We have one USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A port. That means it's 10 gigabits because the naming for USB has gotten absolutely insane. We have 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports with display ports support. Nice. We have HDMI 2.1, which I believe like the base MacBook actually only has HDMI 2. It's only the Pro and the Max ones that have HDMI 2.1. And we know that Apple has in recent years upgraded their audio jack quality to be definitely above what a lot of like default solutions are. We have a full HD camera, so maybe it's actually close to what Apple is offering. We have Wi-Fi 7. Apple is still on Wi-Fi 6E. Hopefully that changes. Bluetooth 5.4. Apple is on Bluetooth 5.3. And we have 72 watt hours. Apple, I believe, on that base MacBook Pro is actually at exactly 70 watts. Let me look that up so I don't say anything wrong. Tech specs. Yeah, so by the way, 600 nits XDR brightness is more like 1000 nits on the entire screen, or 1600 nits peak on a small window of the screen. Yep, 70 no, that yeah, 70 watt hour 70 watt hour lithium polymer battery and 72 watt hours, which is actually such interesting difference in capacities between the the M Pro and M Max versions. Yeah, so that's interesting here, but nothing too great of a difference. So technically the Mac lasted longer with an ever so slightly smaller battery while giving you better peak performance and while running at 50% higher brightness. So if you ever wondered if the efficiency is like exactly matched now thanks to Lunar Lake, it is not.
And
don't please consider also that mini LED in general is less efficient than OLED. So that difference in efficiency very much comes from the chip.
I can't even believe it in terms of value. More RAM, more storage for less cash. What is this? What's going on 2024? I can't believe it.
I mean, that's what you have to offer. If Apple's device is 1 year old and can easily be bought for $300 less than its actual MSRP.
Bravo, Intel. You guys are absolutely killing it.
Okay,
and to think that you guys did this
that's now getting a little bit too cozy for me.
an 8-core CPU with only 4 performance cores. Unlike everybody else that's giving you a lot of performance cores, this is really impressive. I can't wait to see what you got going on in the next couple of years with your updated version of.
I mean, I think it's going to be interesting by the end of next year. Let's actually say Apple's M5 launches at the very end of 2025, and it's actually an N2 chip, right? A 2-nanometer chip. And but Apple's A19 actually launches on N3P because maybe the supply for 2-nanometer just isn't large enough, especially so early in the year, to supply Apple's chips on the laptop. And maybe Apple just gets crazy with the M5. Don't forget, they will still be launching some M4 chips in the second half of next year, so they don't really have to launch any M5 Max until the very end of the year. And maybe then will be a very interesting comparison between Intel's upcoming 18A node, because don't forget, Intel's 20A is dead. We've actually talked about this on the channel, where Intel's Arrow Lake, their big chips, were supposed to come in a mix of some were built on TSMC's 3-nanometer and 3B to be more precise, and others would be built on their own internal 20A node. But that would be reserved more for their mid-range parts rather than their high-end chips. And it seems like whatever is happening with 20A, either it was so good that they decided to just immediately turn it into 18A and speed it up, or it was running relatively poorly, so they decided, let us wait until 18A so that we can actually launch something that might be a little ahead of the competition rather than half a gen behind. That will be interesting. I don't see 18A actually beating TSMC's 2-nanometer, but maybe it actually beats it to the market. So it might not be as performant or as efficient as TSMC, but it might come out half a year or even a full year earlier, which of course would be very interesting, because at that point we are looking, well, how quick can Intel transition to 14A? How quick can TSMC transition to N2P and 16A? Will be very interesting to see, definitely.
This chip, man, the laptop market is getting really competitive, and based on everything that I tested in this video, the ZenBook is definitely the winner in terms of value. If you care about value,
because it was not the winner in anything else, it of course has to win in value, yes.
You should actually buy this laptop, especially since you get the...
Okay, Vadim, you can now chill out a tiny bit. We got it. You like the value of having a lot of RAM and storage, even though not a single test you actually ran proved the value of it in real-world scenarios. You could have at least run your infamous Chrome tab test and seen how it definitely impacts, of course, a 32 gigabyte of RAM device versus an 8 gigs of RAM device, but you didn't.
x86 Windows gaming support, which is really cool, but of course, the MacBook is
Shout out to some of the issues that are currently getting covered for Lunar Lake. Maybe that's why certain reviewers have not yet given it like the full light of day. And it seems like the Battlemage GPU inside Lunar Lake might have some driver related compatibility issues. Now, it's nowhere near close to the issues of the Snapdragon X Elite. It is faster than the Snapdragon X Elite. It's a good competition to Strix's point, but and it's definitely better than macOS at gaming, don't get me wrong. But it seems like if you want the full-on Windows gaming experience, right now Strix is kind of the better default choice. But maybe down the road, as Intel fixes some bugs, some driver issues, Lunar Lake will become all the better still. And it seems like at below 20 watts, it definitely outperforms Strix point, but then above, they kind of even out.
faster in this test, and there's also the M3 Pro and M3 Max, but that's a whole nother story. Basically, good job, Intel. If you have any thoughts about this comparison, let me know down in the comment section below. Definitely subscribe for more videos.
I guess my only thought is that the brightness specification was like objectively wrong. Everything else, I think, was still fair. Like, they didn't run any tests to specifically benefit the Intel device. I think they could have talked more in the final conclusion. Why do I always want to say final solution? I guess that's because all my Jewish friends love to make that joke and kind of made its way into my vocabulary. It's because when I look at that testing, it's very much like very basic testing, like very typical of what MaxTag does. But if you are going to harp on the value so much of the extra storage and RAM, then show us how that storage and RAM might actually like be very, very advantageous even in real world stuff. Everything else that you have shown kind of suggests that while Apple might be charging definitely too much for storage and RAM, they definitely can afford to charge at least somewhat more. And given that the MSRP is not the price at which most people will buy the M3 MacBook Pro in late 2024, right? You see where I'm getting at, right? It's like if you really want to look at MSRPs, Apple completely gets smoked in like a raw value perspective, but MSRP is not everything, especially since I've said so many times over the last couple of years. Wait 2 or 3 months, you're getting very comprehensive 10% discounts on Amazon and other affiliated websites, or wait half a year and now you're getting into crazy 15-20% discount territories. While you can make that argument, well, this one will also get cheaper over time, well, at that point it will have to compete with M4 MacBook Pros, so it better become cheaper. And if Apple really gives you potentially double the RAM at the same base configuration, now with Windows space will really have to cram to give you like similar value arguments as we have seen in this video. Yeah, but that's about it for today. Before I ramp up, one last question. Do you guys have anything else for me to cover, to react to? I just thought this was a very interesting video because I think it was very good in its basicness in a way. Like sometimes when MaxTag, for example, reviews like a brand new piece of hardware, it can sound a little bit sponsory, or when we go to like more the Windows focused channels, they will be very much like gaming focused, one game after another. Most games, of course, that don't have any version on macOS, so we don't have any way to compare that data to Macs, which is, of course, what we kind of focus on. Yeah, so I thought that might actually have been interesting. I would have loved to seen more Lunar Lake testing in general by more channels, but when you actually even look at Lunar Lake, you'll find that most of the testing is like that testing from like 4 days ago, and even like, of course, 10 days ago when the original stuff came out. So it's a bit of a shame, because I think that Lunar Lake does deserve a little bit of a closer look, and maybe everybody's waiting for some bug and driver fixes still, which of course, you know, macOS known to be more stable and more optimized. So maybe another value point to make up for some of the deficit in RAM and storage. But yeah, definitely that was something I really liked. Shout out in a slightly negative way, I guess, to like Hardware Unboxed, because I really like those guys, but they really seem to have completely neglected laptops. Like, I know they do have a channel for monitors, but like, have they silently opened something for laptops? Monitors unboxed and HUB clips. Yeah, so no. They did not open a laptop channel that I did notice. And the same goes for Gamers Nexus, who have actually tested plenty of like Windows handhelds, but like they are testing left and right like all these cases. Like really, like 2 case tests in one day? Am I crazy here? Yeah, like 2 days ago. Like really, guys, you think this is more interesting than like I know that of course they know their audience better than I do, but just because
So
like videos here, it's like Lee and Lee Lencool 207 airflow case. By the way, it was great naming. $68 case, almost nice. Hardware news, get it together, Corsair. Pre-built device. I know they probably will never like any pre-built. The future of Intel, they actually visited their new fabs, which, yeah, like would have been kind of a good option, like a good opportunity to actually test some stuff. Hardware news, this case is a disaster. Guys, a brand new generation came out of hardware. You can actually make maybe some educated guesses by looking at Lunar Lake and saying, oh, if we clock it 20% higher, that's about the performance we should expect from Arrow Lake and desktop. But guys, don't forget, Arrow Lake has like a different AVX 512 implementation, might actually even have more cache or something like that. Instead, we see like all those case testing. It's like almost like a little bit of disrespectful to like the audience, where like so much interesting stuff is happening. And like Strix Point, of course, launched. Now Lunar Lake is proper competition. Yeah, for somebody who does such great tests, and I criticize them from a place of love. I'm not criticizing them because I dislike what they do. I just wish they did more of the great stuff that they already do, and maybe a little less case testing. It's just my thought. You can let me know if you agree with that or disagree with that. Yeah, everybody else is kind of quiet right now. MKBHD has, of course, given us his iPhone reviews last. Then he did some Pixel Pro Fold reviews. In my opinion, he is way too nice to the Pixel, especially like the folds, but I get it because technically there isn't that much competition in terms of foldables in the United States. Then Mr. Who's the Boss, he does all his taste, a crazy tech comparison where he buys like a million pieces of tech. Not too interesting for our channel. I guess Super Saf's latest video would have been kind of the most interesting because it's a camera comparison between the iPhone 16 Pro Max and the Google Pixel 9 Pro XL. I can give you a small overview. The iPhone 1 for me, I know a lot of people in his comments were saying, oh, the Pixel just demolished the iPhone. Completely disagree on that, but you can even see from the views that it's getting like none of the big success of like this iPhone versus Samsung video. So again, this is why I rely on you guys either here or on Twitter telling me what you would like to see me react to. Not quite sure what I would be even able to talk about in the upcoming week, because yeah, like we just talked about Mark Gurman. I doubt that we'll get so many new rumors coming up. Any other topic, even like PlayStation, I'm getting my PS5 Pro in basically exactly a month. So yeah, you can let me know so that I can actually get some ideas. I guess there is still always like the Petapixel guys that I could react to. which is actually great. They did it like almost an explainer in part of a podcast over JPEG XL. I should probably watch that. But of course, they do have their iPhone review. When was it actually? Oh my God, they actually do deliver pretty regular content. Shout out to that. So 16 Pro review, you can actually see how much interest such a video creates, having 4, 5, almost like 10 times more views than some other videos. So maybe I should check that out. But I looked into it. It's basically very positive with saying that photographic styles is pretty cool because it's non-destructive, but otherwise, like the raw improvements over the 15 Pro Max are not as pronounced as the 15 Pro Max was over the 14 Pro Max, because then when Apple introduced Smart HDR5, of course, this one still uses Smart HDR5. Yeah, and there isn't like big controversy or anything in recent times. Like, obviously, you guys know what kind of got my channel started, got me some notoriety, which was like the Linus Tech Tips workplace drama. There isn't really anything from like our perspective here to analyze. I guess I could criticize them also for not having any error lake coverage, but like focusing more on a company that Linus has invested in, which is a little bit problematic, but their content has really devolved into something that I just have no idea what I would be interested in. Like previously, at least every third or fourth video of theirs was some kind of review or analysis, and now it's basically like build this, build this. It's it's not very appealing to me. And I guess every tech channel had to make a video on the PS5 Pro, and I believe Linus wasn't actually too bad on that, though I haven't watched it. Like, I think he actually explained stuff like, oh, it has 2 terabytes of storage. That's already a reason for it to be at least $100 more expensive than the regular PS5, maybe. Yeah, so guys, any other suggestions from you? Any other ideas? Otherwise, I would be what are those search results? Those have nothing to do with me. Like KSI new song, why would I ever look that up? I think those are just recommendations. Yeah, but unfortunately, not too much new tech stuff before the actual October event. So I was really interested in actually giving you coverage of that October event. But as always, I remain interested in you guys telling me what I should cover next, what is happening interestingly in the world of tech and tech YouTube, and maybe some drama. But for now, it's all a little bit quiet on the Western front. And I'll let, of course, you guys know when I'll be streaming next time. But until then, thank you so much for tuning in. Before I actually leave you, please consider doing all the YouTube jazz, subscribing to the channel, liking the video, sharing it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Please, once the stream ends, consider leaving a comment on the actual video, not during the live chat, but in the actual comment section. That helps a lot with the algorithm. If you want to support this channel directly, whenever you catch me live, please consider leaving a super chat or a super sticker as a small donation. Or you can become a channel member right here on YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon. But of course, just watching these videos also helps tremendously. Thank you so much. Let's see what else we get before the actual October event. Maybe we'll get more leaks about like the new Mac Mini and stuff like that. I would love to cover some of that. But until then, I'll let you know when I will be streaming next. Thank you so much. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.